Welcome to the Trustbound Podcast. Welcome to our very first Trustbound Breakdown of a Trustbound episode. So I've been thinking about my conversation with Tomás all week. And the thing that keeps coming back to me isn't the business partnership story. I told you it was going to be a great guest and a great story. But rather it's how fast everything moved. From strangers to a WhatsApp group to a meeting book to a year-long partnership. Well, actually, 2-year-long partnership now. How does that happen? And if you've been paying attention to the principles we laid out, you already know the answer. The episode and the conversation with Tomás is a masterclass in Principle 2, Borrowed Trust. But it also shows us Principle 1, Trust before transaction, Principle 3, which is context is currency, and Principle 6, which is packs over pipelines. Four principles in one conversation. Let me walk you through how each one showed up. So the entire story hinges on Guillermo Arenas. Memo, a friend I met at HubSpot, Colombian connection, we bonded over soccer, just a real friendship built over years with zero business agenda. With Memo, when Guillermo introduced me to Tomás, he wasn't just connecting two people. He lent us his trust. He was connecting Tomás, a very, very, very old friend of his, because they met in school, to me, a great friend from HubSpot. And, he told Tomás, hey, I vouch for Mauricio. And he told me, hey, I vouch for Tomás. And because we both have deep, genuine relationship with Guillermo, we walked into that first call with a level of trust that usually takes months to develop. Months to develop. And I said directly to Tomás in that first conversation, I told him, hey, that there is already this weird sense of implicit trust here. And I wasn't going to, of course, do him dirty, because doing him dirty would be doing Guillermo dirty, and I'd never want that. That's borrowed trust in its purest form. The mutual relationship becomes the invisible governance layer. No contract needed, just a person, both sides of the aisle respect deeply. And then there was the moment that sealed everything. When I was deciding between agencies, Guillermo told me, something happens to me, I'd leave my kids with Tomás. That's definitely not a business endorsement. That's a life endorsement. And that level of trust transferred directly. After that, there was nothing left to evaluate. But here's the thing people miss. Borrowed trust only works because of Principle 1. Guillermo's introduction only carried weight because the trust between us was built before any transaction existed. I didn't build a relationship with Memo because I thought he'd introduce me to a dev agency and, a creative agency someday. We bonded over soccer, over being Colombians in Boston, over lunches with no agenda, over, fellow HubSpotters. And Tomás and Memo had the same thing, a genuine relationship going back to high school, and, that bonded over, they were even business partners in Stereotech that today is Mavity. And their relationship bonded over things much more special than business. Business was never the point, and that's exactly why the introduction worked, because the trust underneath it was real. It was earned over years of showing up without an agenda. If either of those relationships had different transactional um, purposes, or hidden agendas, the whole chain breaks. The introduction, it definitely lands differently. The first call feels uh, completely different as well. The trust isn't there. Principle one is the foundation that makes principle two possible. And then Tomas made a point in our conversation that connects directly to principle three. He talked about having hundreds of WhatsApp groups and conversations that he never went back to. People he connected with at some point, but for some reason, um, the context faded. And once context fades, the relationship stops moving. Not because you don't care, but nothing is holding the thread. He also said trust is not a noun, it's an action because it's proactive. And I think that ties into context perfectly. And I think that's absolutely brilliant. Context doesn't preserve itself, you have to maintain it, you have to keep the thread alive. That's the structural problem. That's what most people are missing. And then Tomas talked about trust circles, how when things get hard, when you need to pivot, when the world shifts, you go back to your core network, your 5, 10, 20, 40 people. And from there, you rebuild outward. That's Pax over pipelines. You don't grow by targeting accounts individually. You grow by investing in your core nodes and letting their influence radiate. Tomas described it intuitively without even knowing the principle, which tells me it's real. It's how trust actually moves. So, from Tomas's episode, 4 principles. Borrow trust as the main event. Trust before transaction as the foundation. Context is currency as the structural challenge. And packs over pipelines as the growth model. One conversation, 4 layers of trust bound in action. If this resonated, pay attention to where trust has already been doing the work for you. That's where momentum starts. Learn more at itoguide.com. See you next time. I'm Mauricio Suarez, and this is the Trustbound Podcast.